Pujya Satsang. What a gift it is each evening to be able to gather here in the sacred garden area. We begin, as always, with a question that comes in from our family, community, that joins us online, that can't be with us physically, but that is joining in from their own homes and their own cities around the world. And in love for them, we begin with a question that comes from them and then open it to any questions that anyone here has. What is the hardest thing about a spiritual journey? It's so interesting because spirituality should be the easiest thing in the world. It's coming back to ourself. It's not like going to outer space and you need to learn all kinds of physics and equations and math and science and ways of, living in a spaceship or whatever one would have to learn to go to outer space. It's ourselves. Literally, a spiritual journey is ourself. It should be the simplest, the most self-evident thing in the world. And yet it's such a challenge. Going to school, doing well in school, playing sports, getting a job, doing well in a job, making money, learning to play all sorts of instruments, learning all sorts of hobbies, memorizing so many words to so many songs and whatnot. I mean, we do so much so easily. And yet, ourself is the place where people say, "Are, I don't know, ye to main nahi kar pata. Mere se nahi hota. I can't do it." And so the question then becomes, well, what is there between myself that says I'm going to be on a spiritual journey? I want to go deeper on a spiritual path. I want to awaken. I want to become enlightened. I maybe just want to find peace and truth. What is it between that and myself, my capital S self, that is the destination? What is there that blocks that? I mean, in life, externally, there's so many obstacles. Interest rates go all over the place. Inflation is all over the place. Unemployment is all over the place. The laws of nature, fires and earthquakes and hurricanes and floods, all over the place. But inside ourselves, none of those has any bearing on us. What is that barrier? Why is it such a challenge? And it's actually really simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's really simple. It's what we call the ego. But it's important to define what that means, because the ego is just this kind of amorphous word that we throw around like the headless villain that no one's actually ever seen, no one can really describe, but is killing everyone in their sleep. So what is that ego? Because if you're going to conquer something, and I say conquer very, very hesitantly, because I really try to avoid using the idea or words around battle. A lot of people talk about annihilating the ego, beating the ego. Yeah, you shake your head, no, you've tried, been there, done that. No, doesn't work. And the reason that it doesn't work is because when I say to myself, today is the day I'm going to annihilate my ego, who's listening? Right? We wake up in the morning or we go to sleep at night and we're like, okay, now, ego, gone. And the ego is sitting in there with front row seats to this lecture of yours, planning and plotting how to make sure it's not annihilated. I mean, try to just, don't really do it, but imagine trying to just kill an ant or a mosquito. It's not as easy as it seems. You'd think, my God, a little ant, a little mosquito. But if you've ever run around a room in summer before you sleep and you know that it's just going to get you all night, and there's a mosquito and he's going, and you're going around the room like trying to get the mosquito. The vast majority of times the mosquito wins. Doesn't want to die. Nothing wants to die. Not a little ant, not a mosquito, and certainly not your ego. So instead of thinking about battling with it or conquering it or annihilating it, think about how to live with it. Raise your hand if you've got a family member, and I won't ask which one it is, so don't worry, no family secrets exposed. But raise your hand if you've got a family member who, or a workplace colleague, or a neighbor, who, if it were up to you and you could very gently magic wand that person out of the picture of your life, that you would happily do that. Raise your hand if there's someone in your life like that. I think most people have someone in our lives that if we could just be free of them, but we can't be. It's our family. We don't even want to think that we would like to be free of a certain family member. Neighbor, colleague, you can't be free. They're living next door unless you up and move or quit your job. You're stuck with them. They are the one in the next door cubicle. They are the one in the house next door or across the street. So the question becomes how to live with them. And it's really the same thing with the ego. It's not about annihilation, but it's about how can I live with this experience, and we'll get more into what the ego is in a moment. How can I live with it, but simultaneously, how can I take away its power? How can I make sure that it is not running the show? And that's really the key point. Now, when we talk about the ego as this block, what is that? Well, a lot of us think of the ego as just arrogance. Think, oh, you've got a lot of ego. Like if I walk around and I say, I am so great. I am just the greatest. I am just the smartest. You'd be like, God, she's got a lot of ego. But the ego is more than just arrogance. The ego is actually that whole sense of who we think we are. Everything you tell yourself about yourself actually is an aspect of ego. This is my name, this is who I am, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. These are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. This is my history. This is where I'm from, this is what I've experienced. These are my dreams. This is what makes me angry. This is who I love. All of this is actually part of the ego. The ego is that constantly working aspect of ourself that is constantly trying to define ourself. We're constantly trying to define the self, to identify the self. Who am I? And we define ourselves by the size and shapes of our bodies, by our histories, by our relationships, by our careers. I am a doctor. I am a lawyer. I am a measly window washer. But it's all ego. It's all this false way of understanding the self. But it's a very strong energy that's constantly wanting to hold on to who we think we are. That's why, for example, even just in arguments with each other, it's why being the one to say sorry first is so hard. Otherwise you'd think, oh, what's the big deal? Like, obviously it's nicer to sleep in a bed together than to have one of you on the couch, and if all it takes is saying I'm sorry, why not? Obviously, it's nicer to be on speaking terms with the people around us than giving each other the silent treatment and slamming doors because we're not speaking to each other. So we speak through our door slams. But why don't we then? The reason we don't is there's that ego that says, if I say I'm sorry, they won't understand what I need. They won't understand who I am. They will take advantage of me. So it's this ego constantly trying to make sure that you understand who you are, that everyone else understands who you are. This is how you better talk to me. This is how you better treat me. This is who I am, for God's sakes. Don't try to change me. This is who I am. That's the ego. And the reason that it's the biggest hurdle on the spiritual path is spirituality is all about realizing I'm nothing. A beautiful capital N nothing. Not nothing as in insignificant and irrelevant, but nothing as in no distinction, no separateness. You could also say, I am everything. Different semantics, same experience. The easiest way to think about this is if you've got a glass jar of air. Okay, you've got a glass jar full of air. Now the glass jar breaks. What do you have? Right? Some say nothing. I used to have a glass jar of air, now I don't even have that. But you could also say, I now have everything because I used to only have this much air. Now the glass has broken. Now it's all mine. And there's no right or wrong. In the Buddhist tradition, they tend to speak about it as nothingness, shunya. In the Hindu tradition, we tend to speak about it as everythingness, Purna. But it's the same phenomenon. Neither of them can coexist with a sense of, oh, who am I? Well, I am this 50-year-old female American-born sannyasi, and I'm about 5'3", and I live in India, and I wear orange robes, and this is what I like, and this is what I don't like, and neither nothingness nor everythingness works with that story. And so as long as I'm attached to that story, as long as I'm attached to, here's who I am, here are my struggles, here's what I've experienced that hurt me, that abused me, that betrayed me, that harmed me, and that's why I am depressed, anxious, miserable, addicted, unable to trust, unable to love. As long as we're attached to any of these stories, we can't be nothing, we can't be everything. Because then we've said, well, I'm just like this little thing over here. So that attachment to this little thing over here is the biggest obstacle to spirituality. If you notice when you meditate, a lot of times people will say, I'm meditating and it's beautiful. And I'm melting and merging and just into this beautiful experience of oneness. And then suddenly there's this sort of inner panic. Something draws me back. Sometimes it's because it seems like the breath is stopping. There's this panic that says, what if I stop breathing? But ultimately what it is in all of these cases is the ego terrified that you're going to actually realize how very flimsy it really is. One of the other ways to think about it that I love is, you know, the story of the Wizard of Oz, right? So in the Wizard of Oz, we have the wizard. And everybody is in awe of the wizard. But nobody ever sees the wizard. The wizard speaks to all of the people of the land of Oz from behind a curtain. It adds to the beautiful mystery. It adds to the awe. It adds to the mystique. And of course, we have our yatra, led by Dorothy to see the wizard. I won't go into all the details, but when they finally reach the wizard, what happens? It's been too long since we've read the story. So what happens is Dorothy's little dog, Toto, actually pulls back the curtain. And instead of this massive being, awe-inspiring being, instead of that, the wizard is actually this tiny, puny little guy with a big projector. And he projects his image upon the screen. And the ego is really kind of like that. It works as long as we don't look straight at it, as long as we are letting it run the show from behind the scenes. But the moment that we actually pull back the curtain, so the ego says, I am this. Well, what if you just pulled back the curtain and stared straight at it and said, really? Really you are? I am 50 years old? Female, born in America? Really? Who? Who is 50 years old? Well, this body. Well, which part of the body? Okay, say the arm. Well, no, actually see every single aspect of this arm, from my skin cells to my blood to the muscles, to every aspect of this arm has regenerated many, many, many times since this body came out of the womb of my mother 50 years ago. So then who's 50 years old? There isn't one cell in my body that is 50 years old. They've all regenerated. Okay. So then it starts to get interesting. Right? So who is 50? Who is female? Who is from America? Well, not the body. Not the soul. The soul, of course, was never born, never dies. We know that the soul has chosen this body. So what is it that's 50 years old? An idea. It's an idea. It's an identity. A birth took place 50 years ago. There has been sort of a continual identification by the cells of my brain, the electrical and chemical patterns in my brain that have continued voluntarily to identify as the no longer existing cells that were born 50 years ago. But you see how flimsy that is, right? And the moment that we can realize that the ego is that flimsy, and that ultimately the goal is to go beyond that, then the ego stops being a hurdle. It's a hurdle only as long as I identify with it. So this is what our spiritual practice is about. This is why we meditate. It's why we self-inquire, who am I? And just be lovingly curious with yourself. When you say to yourself, who am I? And the self says, well, I'm 50. Really? Who? Well, okay, so I'm a doctor. Well, who's a doctor? Who were you before you got out of medical school? You still were saying I and me long before you were in medical school. So who are you? And what you'll find is that even before you have any kind of overwhelming experience of the answer, the simple practice of asking the question transforms you and helps to melt the hold that the ego has on us. And then it stops being a hurdle. Does anyone here have a question? Yes, in the back. He's just bringing you the microphone.
Namaste.
Namaste.
A couple of days ago, you mentioned that the earth has certain sacred spots or vortexes, even prior to there being ashrams or temples or anything that honors them. And my question is, after something is built, a temple or an ashram, and people start coming to it, does human interaction disturb those energies or does it enhance them?
Beautiful. I think it really depends. We are all energy. So each of us is an energetic being. We look solid, right? We can all give our height and our approximate weight, and you get some tape measures. We could give you the measurements of, various circumferences of various parts of our body. But the truth is, if you look at any of us under an electron microscope, there's no circumference. There's no height. There's no place that you actually end and the world begins. We're all whirling energy. And the vast majority of what we are is space. Right? The electrons are whirling around the nucleus of these atoms, but the vast majority of the atom is space. So most of what we are is space surrounded by energy, or space in energy. Meaning that since everything is energy, we are energy. The trees are energy, the sun is energy. The flowers are energy, the magnetic force of gravity is energy. The planetary influences are energy. There is sound energy being emitted from our mouths. Our thoughts even are energy. Beautiful research over the last few years has now given us these machines. My beautiful, beloved friend, Dr. Bruce Lipton, was talking recently about a machine that reads brainwaves without touching the skull. So most of us are familiar with the brain scan where they put all the electrodes on the head. But actually now they can do a brain scan without even touching your head. The machine sits a few inches outside the skull, meaning we are actually emitting enough energy that you can read the waves of my brain from outside. So when we talk about different people or different places or different moments having different vibrations, right? Well, we now know that literally our thoughts are creating energetic vibrations. Now, is that enhancing or disturbing the natural energy of sacred places in earth? Depends what we're doing. I think in sacred places here in the Himalayas, in this sacred land, rishis and sages and saints and yogis and seekers, spending thousands of years coming and meditating and praying, doing yoga, studying scriptures. I imagine it's enhanced it. I imagine that the energy has grown even. At the same time that probably aspects of it have dissipated. I would imagine that the attention, the intention of people who can come these days on a quick half-an-hour flight may not be necessarily as focused, as disciplined, as committed as those who had to come on foot, walking, or on the back of a horse, carrying everything they needed in carriages and whatnot. So I think in a place like this, it's both. I think it depends where you are, but we definitely interact with the energy around us. And if our energy is in alignment with, for lack of a better term, the good vibrations, then we'll enhance them. But if we walk into a place like that, full of negativity, full of ignorance, full of greed, full of jealousy, full of objectification, I think we could negatively impact it. And it's one of the beautiful and powerful responsibilities we have, is to realize that we are energetic transmitters and that we have a responsibility, an energetic responsibility, to not only sacred places, but actually to every single person we meet, every place we walk into every day. Go grocery shopping while you're in a really bad mood? Curse everybody you know in your mind and from your lips as you're wandering the aisles? Well, maybe you should work that stuff out at home first. Right? I mean, it's like in COVID, we were taught, especially with Omicron, as it got more and more contagious, if somebody sneezes in an elevator and then leaves the elevator and someone else walks into the elevator, they could actually get COVID. Well, in the same way, we haven't studied it as well, but energetically, if I stand in an elevator and I'm cursing and I'm swearing and I'm furious and then I walk out and you walk in, if you're energetically sensitive, I believe you'd feel it. We pick up on things. And so we've all got actually a responsibility, I think, to emanate as much love and joy and peace as we can. Not falsely. It doesn't mean never be angry. It just means, stay home. Be in the dirt. Hug a tree. Give all of that to nature that actually can absorb it, that can transmute it, rather than to another human being where it just becomes a ripple domino effect of negativity. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, Purnima. Sure. कुछ भी पूछ सकते हैं. We'll take this as the last question. और बाद हिंदी में बोलिएगा, और बाद में English में translate करूँगी. She's going to ask in Hindi, but then I'll translate.
साइकोलॉजी में एक थियरी है ट्रांस में ले जाने की. तो उसमें ऐसा बोलते हैं, आप तो ज़्यादा जानेंगे तो आप बताएंगे हमें. तो उसमें अगर उस टाइम पे ट्रांस में लेके जाके कुछ फीड किया जाए कि समथिंग आई एम फीमेल एंड मुझे ऐसा ट्रांस ये किया जाए फीड कि यू आर मेल, तो कुछ समय बाद ऐसा आता है कि जब मैं वापस ट्रांस से लाते हैं तो आई एम फीलिंग दैट आई एम मैन एंड मैं उसी तरह बिहेव करती हूँ. तो ये थियरी अगर क्रिमिनल्स है उनको जब आजीवन कारावास जो देते हैं उस समय अगर ये थियरी उनके ऊपर लागू की जाए तो क्या वो हमेशा के लिए आई एम प्योर सोल और अच्छे हो जाएंगे. और दूसरी बात कि अगर बहुत सारे टेररिस्ट है जिनको हम फांसी देते हैं तो उनको भी फांसी देने के बजाय उस टाइम उनको लाइफ टाइम कारावास में रखना है, उनको छोड़ दिया तो वापिस वो ट्रांस से.
फांसी का क्या मतलब?
हैंग. तो उनको ये देने के बजाय उनको ट्रांस में ले जाके वो फीडिंग किया जाए तो और फिर आजीवन जेल में ही रखना है क्योंकि छोड़ दिया तो वापस टेररिस्ट है वो उनको टेररिस्ट बना देंगे. तो ऐसा हो सकता है क्या?
Beautiful question. So she said in psychology they talk about hypnosis, in which in hypnosis she said she's heard you can tell someone something while they're under hypnosis, they believe it, and then they come out of hypnosis and they keep believing it, that it has changed their thought patterns. So she said if that's true, then, bless you, then when we have criminals or terrorists, instead of locking them up, instead of beheading them or executing them in some other horrific fashion, couldn't we simply hypnotize them all so that they would believe I am a pure soul, and they would stop acting in that way. So hypnosis is very powerful. It requires a few things, though. First of all, it requires the subject to be open to hypnosis. I believe it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to hypnotize someone who does not want to be hypnotized. So you need that person to be open to hypnosis, number one. Number two, it doesn't, I don't think from everything I know, work in ways that completely undo and change all of the way that you think. So they tend to use hypnosis around specific issues. For example, I smoke cigarettes. I've tried to quit smoking. I can't quit smoking. I get hypnotized. Under hypnosis, I am made to have an experience of smoking, and as I'm smoking, my lungs are catching fire and my whole body is filling with this black, horrible mess. Or God knows what else. I mean, I guess depending on how creative the hypnotist may be. You could imagine all sorts of things. That then the person emerges from hypnosis, and now when you offer them a cigarette, they say, oh God, no. Because now they have had a very bad experience around cigarettes. Or you take someone who, for example, was, let's say, harmed as a child. And they're suffering. And they're suffering because they feel like they deserved it. There's something wrong with them. They must have done something to be the one who was harmed. You put that person under hypnosis and you have them go back to that time when they were harmed. And you, as the doctor, speak to them. So let's say, for example, that you have someone whose mother or father or brother or aunt or uncle abused them badly. Now they're suffering as an adult. Depression, anxiety, addiction, misery. You put them under hypnosis and you, as the psychologist, speak to them as the father, as the mother, as the brother, as the aunt. Telling them, I'm so sorry that I hurt you. It wasn't about you. Actually, see, in those days, I was going through so much of my own struggle. You were so sweet and innocent, and I took it out on you. And that's just, one tiny little example, but that would be the sort of thing. And then when that person emerges from hypnosis, they feel a sense of closure, a sense of healing. They have heard on a deep subconscious level that voice. Alternatively, let's say someone was told when they were young, you're worthless, you're stupid, you'll never be anything. And they believe it. You put them under hypnosis. And you get them to recite, to say, to know, I am worthy. I am whole. I am complete. You get them to see through why the person who said that said it, why it was a lie. They emerge from hypnosis and they are healed of that, or at least moving on the path to healing. I haven't heard of any hypnosis experiences in which someone's entire way of thinking about themselves and the world gets transformed. Because when people are terrorists, it's a whole world view. It's not like saying I have anger problems. बिना सोच के मैं मार देती हूँ उन लोगों को. बाद में बहुत बुरा लगता है. लेकिन उसी समय मैं कुछ कर नहीं सकती हूँ. Chalo, you can work with that. But if you're dealing with someone whose entire worldview says, we are the good ones, they are the bad ones, and God has told us that God wants us to finish them. You would need somebody to walk into your clinic and say, I have a delusion. Okay? I am psychotic. I hold a belief that is absolutely untenable. I've got this crazy belief that God wants me to harm others. I've got this crazy belief that God really believes that other people, based on the color of their skin, based on their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, that God wants them to die. Can you please help me be free of this crazy idea? Then maybe, if you're very good and you've got some time and the person is really open and they stop interacting with everyone they know who believes that crazy thing, and they stop watching YouTube videos telling them that crazy thing, then you might stand a chance. But I love the idea in theory, because the truth is you've hit upon something that really is the core of truth, which is, it's just a thought. Terrorism, violence, it's just a thought. It's one thought that leads us into that action. One thought that then creates another, that creates another, that creates another, and ultimately those thoughts coalesce into an action. And so if we recognize the power of that one thought in our own lives, we may not be able to hypnotize others, but we certainly can change our own way of thinking. And so all of our own way of thinking that leads us into harm, into violence. We may not be terrorists, but are we gossiping about others? Are we saying nasty things about each other? Are we saying nasty things about ourselves? Are we telling ourselves, you're stupid, you're ugly, no one will ever love you? Are we moving through the world with what we eat, what we wear, what we buy, how we live in a way of violence, of harm? Well, it all comes from one thought. One thought. And we actually do have the power within ourselves to change that one thought. Meditation. Hypnosis. Interestingly, on a neurologic level, they found that the brain waves that we have during meditation, during hypnosis, and in the first 7 years of our lives are very similar. It's the time in which we are most open to learning, to absorbing, to forming how we think. It's why meditation changes our brain, changes our thoughts, changes how we live. It's why the vast majority of that ails us today in our own hearts and minds happened in the first 7 years of our life. because that was the time that it went in the most deeply. If today at 50, somebody standing on a street corner says to me, "You are worthless, you are horrible, I hate you, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to kill you," I'll just be like, "Oh God, somebody, please, let's give this guy some love. Like, not too close maybe, but let's send him a lot of love from a safe distance." But I'm not going to lose sleep over the fact that some random guy thought I was worthless and horrible and wanted to harm me. But in our early childhood, someone says that to us, and it goes in very deeply, especially when it's someone we trust. A family member, a teacher, a friend. Goes in very deeply. Because our brain waves at that time are very, very open. Now I've got my thinking mind that says, "Oh yeah, it's just the crazy guy on the corner." But when we are in meditation, when we are in hypnosis, when we are very young, that thinking mind, thankfully, at least as far as meditation goes, is not so operational. It's very nice in meditation to be free of that. It's what enables us to experience the truth. So use meditation as a way to help you change what you think. And yeah, things like hypnosis. There's a lot of beautiful psychological techniques that work with the subconscious. Because that's what it's about. It's about getting into the subconscious. When we're young, we're kind of operating as the subconscious. And in our meditation and in our hypnosis, we're back in that state. So yeah, it's a much more powerful technique to use to change yourself than to change others. But there are programs underway in jails, in prisons, working in, halfway houses and so many places. But I'll tell you lastly, the very best place to do this kind of work? Schools. Before they become criminals. Before they become terrorists. Before those thoughts actually start. If we can bring teachings of, I am a pure soul, I am love, I am divine, I am one with all, into our schools. We don't need to hypnotize them. We don't even need to get them meditating if they're young enough. They're already in that state of mind. We just need to give them the right sanskaras. And that's why education is so important. Beautiful. Have a beautiful rest of your evening, everyone. Beautiful, warm spring night. And a beautiful morning and day to all of our family joining us from all over the world. And look so forward to seeing you all tomorrow.